Howdy ho again, everyone. Today I've compiled the many segments of my years of adventures through Rimworld. Playing through is everything from a single colonist trapped underground, Seablock and Skyblock challenges, a zombie apocalypse colony, and beyond. These segments have all been scattered across the internet. So today, I've brought them together for the greatest viewing experience possible. Compiled, edited, and of course, enhanced. All for your viewing pleasure. Updated to match the sensibilities of a modern viewing audience. So without any further ado, I present to you the complete survival saga of Rimworld. In this video, I'm going to try to survive as a single colonist in Rimworld, but I need to earn 100 experience points for every tile I unlock that I step onto. So spawning in with 0 experience points in every skill area, would I have what it takes to achieve the following goals? 1. Subsist, and farm or hunt enough food to survive indefinitely. 2. Fend off any raiders that attack my encampment. 3. Build up a safe and habitable base without going stir-crazy. And 4. My ultimate goal. Start researching and open up the way to more advanced Rimworld technologies. This is all based on the Tileman run by SRAM 1337 in old school RuneScape, then popularized by Settled. The hard part in Rimworld is figuring out what I could do in my limited area to begin with. So I set out on the first day to see what I could accomplish as a solo Tileman. Day 1. I spawned in naked in a drop pod from outer space, early in the morning on the 2nd of April-May. 0 experience, but with a few passions to help me earn skills faster. How would I earn XP if I couldn't move around at all to begin with? Since I was stuck in a single soil tile with no resources around me, my only option was to sow crops underneath myself in the cell I was standing in. So from that first crop I sowed, I earned a little experience, a couple tiles in front of me. Now that I could move around a bit, hunger would be my first enemy. I had nothing to eat, and I didn't have the time to wait for the crops I'd sown underneath me to grow. So instead, I used the experience I earned from sowing my first few crops to move a couple tiles north towards some berry bushes. On the way there, I cut down a tree out of the way for more experience with plants. Due to my low plant cutting skill, it would be a small disaster if I failed to harvest the berries in front of me. That would mean I'd lose my first essential meal in the process. So I got some experience with plants and used my first 500 XP, unlocking 4 tiles to the north and the one beside them to the east to gain access to that first essential berry bush just above me and to the right. But I waited until later to harvest the bushes. By noon, I had over 1500 XP, and I had unlocked 15 tiles around me for more room to keep sowing the crops. With 3 berry bushes unlocked, food would now be secure, at least in the short term. My next need was shelter, so I started unlocking the tiles inside the ruins of the steel building beside me as I contemplated putting a roof over my head. What else could I do for food? A turkey nearby had wandered into the ruins just beside my unlocked tiles, but being without a weapon, I decided to prepare myself for any hunting or potential encounters with wildlife by using a crafting spot to fashion a wooden club out of some of the wood I had lying around on the tree I had cut down. The turkey got away for now, but next time I'd be ready. By the end of the night, I'd acquired over 3,000 XP, mostly from sowing plants, and I retired to a sleeping spot near the ruins, hungry, chilly, and exhausted. The first day came to an end. When I arose on the second morning, I enjoyed my first meal of berries from one of the bushes I'd unlocked the day before. I got lucky with my planting skill, and I successfully harvested the berries without botching it. I continued by sowing more crops for more XP, and then in the afternoon, the turkey wandered back toward my tiles. I seized the opportunity to kill it with my club, and I sustained only minor wounds from being scratched by its feet. Fortunately, the combat gave me a whopping 1200 melee experience, and an opportunity to push my medical skills by bandaging. With that, I unlocked and claimed the tiles leading up to the ruined steel structure beside me, where I'd make my way for greater shelter and security next. By the very end of the day, I was exhausted, slightly malnourished, and ready for bed. But not before I deconstructed some more of the ruin walls and placed my sleeping spot inside of them. Just before midnight, I managed one last successful berry harvest, but it gave me food poisoning from the raw ingredients. I'd spend the next day nauseous as I stumbled around slowly. So the second day ended, with 59 tiles unlocked. On the third day, I did a little construction on the ruins, then I pathed my way down to some full-grown trees just to the south to harvest them for wood, so that I could add a door and wall and roof myself in for the next night. I passed 10,000 XP and 100 tiles unlocked. Thankfully, all the experience I'd gained snowballed, and then it let me unlock even more tiles farther to the south and a cluster of berry bushes to secure enough food to get me through the first rice harvest in a few days' time. As the third day drew to a close, I began to recover from the food poisoning, and now I could finally sleep with a roof overhead. So ended the third day. At dawn on the fourth day, I built a fire from the trees I had downed. A squirrel went rabid and attacked me. Not much of a danger, but a meal to prepare next. Again, I sustained minor wounds, but I was victorious with my club, and then I rested. Then I ended the 4th day by skinning the corpses of the turkey and the squirrel to add meat to my ingredients. 160 tiles unlocked, and I allocated them toward accessing the rest of the ground in my makeshift hovel. The 5th day arrived, and I filled out more nearby tiles for agriculture. More basic work. In the afternoon on the 6th day, a raider from a nearby faction came to rob me, so I prepared a few spike traps in my doorway, but I couldn't lure him in fast enough to prevent him from setting fire to my crops and destroying much of my food supply. Thankfully, I escaped unscathed, and the rains extinguished the worst of the flames. I stripped him for his gear, then I rested, and arose again the next day for more work. And by the end of the first week, I'd raised over 23,000 experience and unlocked 230 tiles. Now came a great sense of accomplishment. 1 full week. I'd moved out of my starting square, fought and labored for all my meals, fended off a raider, and made of my home a more pleasant habitation. But there was still more to do. For now I rested. Now it was time to start expanding to meet my visions beyond my meager start. The 8th day dawned and I gathered more wood. Now I could build a research bench, but I had a lot more needs to meet before I could use it to research batteries and establish a safe power source to secure my lodgings. So before I did all that, the next task would be to repurpose the nearby ruins into a stockpile zone and get all my materials out of my house. I secured and roofed it late into the evening on the 9th day, and I added a torch to light the way as I could mine out more space for finished goods and resources inside. By the end of the day, I'd unlocked 300 tiles, and I'd eked out my own civilized corner in the wild. I finished the day by building a wooden bed. I started embarking on new projects, like specializing my crop grow zones, and deconstructing more ruins to the south to acquire non-flammable stones and upgrade my house. Another raider approached with a club, but by this time my defenses were well maintained, and I just walked behind some spike traps in the doorway to avoid conflict. The 13th day ended, and I'd locked more than 400 tiles by now. On the 14th day, I undertook reconstructing my hovel out of granite, but I accidentally triggered a spike trap nearby. Unfortunate, but I bandaged and recovered. And after a short time, I managed to finish the hut in its complete area by the 16th day. Then I built a short trap hallway out front to keep safe and sound. Now I had a lot of experience, nearly 600 tiles worth. So I made space for stone cutting with all the sandstone chunks lying around my encampment. Then I took the cut blocks and used them to tile a neat sandstone floor in my bedroom, all by the light of a torch. And I built furniture to make my lodging comfortable and inviting. A few more raiders arrived, but nothing I couldn't handle with my spike traps. I even started making a tally of their gravestones. 4 had come for me and failed. That was most of it. Food, defenses, and shelter. But if I wanted power and comfortable lodging, I'd need to upgrade my home with steel. So I allocated my 770 tiles toward pathing southward, all the way down toward a rich steel deposit southeast of my base. Now I could specialize the structures of my encampment. A kitchen, a workshop, and add stone shelves to my storage which wouldn't burn in case of a fire. Even little luxuries like chairs for all my workshops. All that I accomplished as raiders fell into my spike traps, helping me spend my time gaining more constructive experience elsewhere. All this culminated in just over 900 tiles unlocked by the 7th of September, a little over 2 seasons into my expedition. But for all my work, I was still managing without any power source. So I decided next to add power conduits to all the stone walls, now safe from any possible fire that might potentially break out. And then I added lamps in the rooms. But I still needed a power source, and I lacked the essential electronic components required for building a wind turbine. So I pathed my way southward toward the only nearby source of components, compacted into the wall of the mountainside, most easily accessible by digging in a straight line southward through a wall of sheer rock with the tiles I had unlocked. When I returned, components in hand, I was able to construct a wind turbine, leading the way to better, more efficient lighting. I didn't have to keep refueling torches by hand. Workshops, more clothing, now I had stockpiles of extra resources to draw from as the coming winter set in, but still no way to store my power yet. So by the 13th of September, nearly 3 full seasons into my expedition, I laid out the blueprints for a research room, the culmination of months of effort, all leading to this, an opportunity to think and lay out plans now separate from the world and its pressures at survival. 1,000 tiles, a cluster at and around my base, supported by a branching network of veins that led up to it, and made its existence all possible. I completed my research room by the end of September, and by the first day of December, 3 seasons into my expedition, I finally paved the ground of the fertile tiles beneath me, bringing order to the wilderness beneath my feet, and making my compound more optimized and efficient for doing my best work inside of. 7 raider kills, all marked by the gravestones leading up to the entrance. I crafted sculptures to make my bedroom more inviting. I traded wares with traveling merchants who stopped along the way, and I built tool cabinets to raise my efficiency more and more. Next, it was comforts like an indoor heating system, and ultimately it all culminated in clearing out the necessary space and time to begin the real grind, researching technology, batteries where I could back up some power supply for later. Now it came to longer-term thinking, the culmination of all my efforts. So, after I completely walled myself in, snug as a bug in the wintry quiet of my shack, I spent those last days of winter and the first days of spring unlocking the remaining tiles within my walls, master of my domain. And despite a few raids, by the 9th of April-May of the following year, I had finally researched batteries, the symbolic end to my struggles, the automation and advancement of our colony's technology, only for fateful and bad luck to drop me with catching the plague. As a solo colonist with no skill, try as I might after multiple tens with the very best medicine, I simply hadn't acquired the medical skill needed in my first encounters to save myself from this fate. So there I lay on the 11th of April-May, succumbing to the cold grasp of death. Only one work left, to dig my own grave, as I collapsed above the perfectly incomplete gravestone. But it was all somehow a perfectly worthwhile and fitting end to my Sisyphean struggle. Ironical and comical, but a tribute to the futility and the triumph of human progress.
It's always a satisfying experience to watch your colonies grow and expand in Rimworld, like peering down for a close-up view of an anthill and marveling at the bustling hive, overflowing with activity. To more directly visualize my colony's progress, I undertook a new Rimworld challenge. To survive underground, completely cut off from the normal game world and encased in miles upon miles of solid rock with a single colonist. I chose a pawn who wouldn't break under the pressure of being entombed in earth, and who might stand an honest chance against the sheer brute force that this challenge demanded. I gave him a name overflowing with majesty, Seymour Butts, and I embarked upon my expedition. On the first day, I knew I had to set down a few points so that I could keep coming back to them. My ultimate goal? Dig out a thriving underground metropolis for myself with everything a normal colonist would have access to in the sunlight. 1. Establishing a renewable food source and production benches to sustain myself. 2. Fortifying my cavern with a basic security system from any insects that might infest it. And 3. Dig my way out from underneath the mountain so that I could eventually leave my underground shelter, or more importantly, establish a potential trade route for anyone who wanted to visit my colony. Living under a mountain would lend itself to a sense of timelessness if I didn't adhere to a strict regimen, so the first point on my agenda was to set out my daily schedule to demand a block of work and at least an hour of rest each day. That would help me keep track of time. I spent most of day 1 mining out the basic structure of my home. Right away, I had to plant some nutrifungus on the ground beneath me. It would take a while to grow, and I had only 10 meals beneath me to start. That was all that I had. I slept on the floor that night, quiet, alone, and in the dark. On the second day, I began to strip mine the walls around me. It was essential that I should scour as much surface area as possible throughout the mine if I was to uncover any steel, an extremely valuable resource for building and industrialization. I made my strip mining symmetrical to work evenly throughout. The sun rose and set, and I toiled from dawn to dusk, tilling the ground with gravel for nutrifungus, further increasing my chances at survival once the meals ran out. I planted the last few spores, and then I retired once again, only to sleep on the ground beneath my feet. I still needed a bed and more permanent lodging, though. The third day. Not much else happened on this day. I continued planting, and I farther widened the spread of my strip mines. At the end of the day, I finally gave myself an allowance of a small hollow in the wall in which to sleep for the night. It was better than sleeping on the gravel, and I'd definitely be down here for a while. Day 4. I didn't have many choices. Every single square of ground beneath my feet had to be a bed of growth and sustainment. Soon, my gloomy cavern would evolve into something of a life preservation chamber. I mined further and established specialized chambers in the cavern. 1 room for mushrooms, 1 room for stone chunks, 1 room for stockpiling goods. I slept and I worked, day and night, cleaning, fastidious in my chores. But before long, I was down to my very last meal. I tidied the cavern and busied myself. They say idleness is the devil's workshop, and if I could do anything to distract myself from the onsetting starvation, I would. So I set my house in order while the nutrifungus ripened to begin my new diet. After those last few meals, I'd be eating nothing but nutrifungus for a long, long time. While my present circumstances were anything but exciting, there wasn't a dull moment. I needed to stay organized. Every square of ground tilled increased the chance that I would survive and emerge from that cavern transformed. Mining was a constant grind, and just a week into my expedition I had already gained 5 levels in mining, just to wring out all the potential from that cavern at sustaining life. Indeed, things were getting weirder and weirder in my underground world. A little universe unto itself with everything I needed. Fungus that needed darkness to grow, fiber corn that needed light to grow, and the growing, gnawing concern of malnutrition, punctuated only by anxious and productive excursions deeper and deeper into the mountain. I was beginning to unearth new types of stone. The brown of granite replaced the blue of the marble with which I had grown accustomed, and I staved off the threat of hunger only by eating underripe mushrooms. It would sustain me until the time came for a full grand harvest in my warm little cavern under the mountain. But this weird backward world had become for me a home. I busied myself a little while longer until I finally reached the end of the circle. My crops had grown enough to consume, and it would tide me over. I had accomplished my first goal, and I knew jubilation on that day. For I had, by the sweat of my brow, sustained myself on the little soil I had tilled out of the cavern floor. Mushrooms sustained my body, and an iron will sustained my mind. And despite the plethora of negative effects I was experiencing, I began to unearth yet more new and diabolical contraptions hidden within the mountain. Among them some fossilized machinery I could mine out from the very walls themselves. Now commenced the second major phase of my goals, advancing and industrializing the sources of sustaining my quality of life. I could build, produce, automate, and fabricate machines to help facilitate my survival in that otherwise inhospitable subterranean world. Day 13 began, and my optimism mounted, with the stones arranged in orderly fashion in one hollow, and the mushrooms growing in another. That left me just enough space to start harvesting and packing away mushrooms into storage. I was a little unit of society, freeing up labor from day-to-day gathering in order to accomplish more important long-term tasks, namely, digging my way deeper under the mountain, fashioning building materials from raw resources, and fabricating some makeshift weapons for self-defense. About 2 weeks into my expedition, at the dawn of the 15th day, there was a blight on the fiber corn. Anything less than fast, decisive action to beat the blight back would have spelled swift doom. So as a reaction, to broaden my horizons beyond my little cavern and give myself an honest shot at survival in case the soil beneath my feet should betray me, I struck deeper into the mountain, and there I uncovered the most unlikely of natural cave formations, sprawling and alien in the Underdark. Among the winding turns and dead end, there was fresh water. I hadn't seen any in weeks. Majestic, woody-stemmed fungal growths, and alien insects. They made natural guardians for the resource for which I'd been searching all this time. Steel, there in the mountain. But there was still yet more. Glow stools, and what appeared to be the remains of a conflict between the insects and the mechanoids. So much to explore, so much still yet to unearth. The possibilities were endless, mysterious, and exciting. And as much as my anticipation led me on, I had to retreat back to my cavern and prepare. There were some rock ruins nearby I set about deconstructing, a generous supply of resources. I could use this to keep the megaspider at bay. I waited till nightfall. While it lay there asleep, I mined out the steel in the wall, quietly. I even stole some insect jelly while it was there. With a generous haul of 81 steel, I returned home. Now I had enough resources just to get started. The first item I fashioned was a horseshoe pin for some entertainment, for there wasn't any down here. The rest of my tasks I began to automate away and organize. After that, I set out to cut down some of the timber shrooms. This would provide wood, a much-needed resource, the likes of which I wouldn't find anywhere else. Before nightfall, I added it to my stockpiles. As it turned out, there was a whole world of subterranean timber shrooms. They were abundant down there, abundant as they were in the outdoor world. That, and I kept taking copious amounts of insect jelly, unbeknownst to the megaspider. He had actually been helping me. With the insect jelly filling my belly, I was fully satisfied, and for the first time in a long time, content. But I wouldn't know rest until I had processed all of the resources down here. What if some assailants descended upon my cave? What would I do then? I harvested the last of the timber shrooms, obtaining copious wood. At long last, that delivery was enough to start a workbench. In the night, I toiled to begin my new stone processing project. The work began. I would spend a long time making stone bricks, but it would finally give me plenty, the likes of which I hadn't known since I got down into the cavern. There, it took me 3 days, working and working, but I fashioned all the stone chunks into usable building materials. Just as I predicted at the outset, my progress was evident. With the last of the resources tucked away and processed, I could now move on to more essential building projects. I decided to give myself a proper bedroom, as well as a small chamber for a chem-fuel-powered generator. And it was safe. Having reached the natural caves, I was exposed to the outdoor air. There were a few shafts leading up to the outer sky. Along with that, I built my bed, and I fashioned a door from some granite. A reliable, stoic entryway. After that, it was mostly just a matter of hauling in the necessary materials for fuel. But as it stood, there was something of a startup cost. To get biofuel refining working, I would rely on wood first. With the wood-fired generator completed, I could kickstart my way back into action. And I could keep the first generator for backup. With power running, I could produce natural resources I had obtained in the cave, now in the safety of my own home. I smoothed the walls and wired them together. The first planting of the fiber corn, growing by artificial means. Now I had the avail of all those modern conveniences, coolers, airlocks, things we depend on. I greeted this phase with a major sense of accomplishment, sure, but also prudence about keeping realistic expectations. I was only one man as it stood, and to confront the unknown floodgates of nature with such open arms would be foolhardy. So I hardened my resolve, and I got back to work. As it stood, only a thin layer of rock stood between me and any potential invaders, who might, as I considered it, thunder their way through the air shafts dotting the mountain roof that lay overhead. What resources could I leverage for personal defense? In short, loads of marble. I had control of the hallways, and I could just place these wherever I needed if a threat were to arrive. It was a great way to grind out the last few levels of construction. I fashioned another lamp for my crafting room, and I created a crafting spot to make some simple stone weapons. A basic club would do for now. Life became calm, quiet, and refined again. I had accomplished the second of my goals. I had security. Maybe not much of it, but certainly I could fight a few mega spiders or a small raid. I had a weapon. Now the feelings of urgency gave way to a modern-day ennui, a feeling we greet with sickly familiarity. I cleaned, and I looked for chores to do throughout my home. I had come so far and accomplished so much, and yet I still felt a sense of malaise, like I was merely surviving, hiding inside of my cavern for safety. I'd need to harness the geothermal powers of the mountain around me and bring the fight to my enemy's lair if I were to truly claim mastery of the mountain around me. One man harnessing the power of technology to leverage nature in a fight for survival. I had accomplished my first goal, certainly. I now had a surplus of resources to survive indefinitely and hide in my cavern, and probably survive a while. But to really feel strong, I'd have to bring the fight to my enemies and carve a path out of that mountain to claim victory. I mined deeper into the cavern, and there beneath the shafts of light that extended from the sky, I uncovered a geothermal vent. This demanded mining some of the space around it, all marble. Exposed to the open air, there would be just enough room for one, and I could connect it back to my power grid. But such an undertaking required resources. I decided to lay a trap for the mega spider. Although my feeble human body was significantly weaker, I leveraged reason and used my mind. I could plan for the fight, and so I did, snaring him in my traps. But I paid a heavy price. It had cut off 2 of my toes. 2 of my toes I had paid for safety. I carried back the corpse of the beast and rejoiced. I destroyed that abomination of a nest. The mega spider would not be missed. And there was jubilation when I returned with steel. Now I would have power. My movement recovered, and I accepted a life with only 8 toes left. Now labor commenced on the power lines, and I would have enough to undertake construction on a geothermal power generator. The preparations were complete. I utilized it in constructing the geothermal generator. Now we could harness the sublime power of the earth that had entrapped us, and by the end of the 15th of September, we had more power than we'd ever need. But where to put all that power to best use in my home? Fiber corn grew well in light, but if we added a sun lamp, it would simply flourish. The technological boom sent my confidence soaring, and I mined yet deeper still. There I chanced upon the forbidden chambers of the ancients, and yet so near to the map edge, so near to the finish line. The mysterious ruins of an ancient underground tomb, secret archotechnology, hidden there deep under the mountain. I had come all this way to discover psychic pulsars. There I unlocked the remains of some mercenaries trapped inside the tomb, dormant. I opened the tomb. One was hostile, and it was a mad fight. Shotguns and clubs, tooth and nail, I clawed my way to victory with my awesome mastery of the club. Even without my toes, I was a savage killer. In the confusion that ensued, it was an awesome display of manly ferocity. I had proven my virility in Mortal Kombat, and I increased. And grabbing myself a nice plate of Luciferium, I would have my toes back. Luciferium would allow me to regenerate those toes I had lost, and I equipped it myself. A few days later, clad in marine armor, I mined my way out into the wider world, toes restored and all, for I had overcome the mountain. I was a new man, and I could go on to live in greener fields and pastures new. There's no feeling quite like the sense of mastery achieved when you can construct something from the ground up. I decided to challenge myself in Rimworld to a Seablock by stranding myself upon a small island in the middle of the ocean and seeing if I could make a little way of life for myself upon the waves. You need to decide for yourself weeks in advance what will be the greatest threats to your life, or you might find yourself without any food to sustain life for a matter of days. All the normal dangers of Rimworld, raiders, mad animals, insects, won't be present, but rather, our only adversary will be the ocean itself, and a battle of attrition against the very ground beneath our feet. It doesn't really matter what colonist we start with, but for the sake of argument, let's call him Ocean Man. We started with just a few scattered resources. Day 1. I spawned in as Ocean Man, Sea Man. Don't laugh, that's his name. And his cat, Caesar. Get it? The first task would be to set up a fishing zone. Only one problem with setting up fishing zones is you need shallow water, and all this around him was deep water. There were a lot of short-term goods I'd need, but they were in the water, deteriorating quickly. And nor did I have the research available to do any terraforming yet. I sprung to action and set up a steel research table. In a moment, Seaman was off to work, gathering the needed supplies and delivering them to his research table. There wasn't a lot of time. Hunger would set in soon, and I needed to build over that water fast. In only 1 in-game hour, Seaman finished the table. Great job. Immediately, we'd set out to researching basic terrain terraforming. I began the research. Ocean Man, he's gifted with plants, and we'd set him off to that. But he's also good at research, or at least passionate about it, if not good at it. A sluggish beginner, but he would learn fast, and great things would come of him. Already in only about 3 hours, the need for food had grown by about 50%. I had an idea. On the one hand, while cats make excellent companions, they're also an emergency food stash. But we'll wait and see if it comes to that. Seaman still has some pemmican around. In the day, he paces about while waiting to research. I thought it conservative to give him some accommodations to improve his mood, so I had him build a bed out of steel right next to the water. Great job. Just get to work on that, and let's see what quality he gets. Poor quality. Fantastic. I also thought it wise to have him grow at least a small patch of rice. With the rich soil, there was a decent chance that he could grow this before he even built off his sea platform. So he planted the first few crops, and then he got back to research. At around 10 o'clock, Seaman turned in for the night, and Caesar into the rice patch. I have a backup plan for Seaman to survive. On the one hand, man can survive on cat. The cat, on the other hand, I had my doubts about him. But Ocean Man had made it almost to intellectual level 3. A win for one day. In the morning, Seaman ate more pemmican and began research again. I expanded the rice field production, and then I got back to work. Now running short on pemmican, and my cat suffering from malnutrition. I decided to drop the last of the pemmican I had for my cat. I would suffer the pains of hunger and keep the cat alive a bit longer. The cat ate the pemmican. The cat would live to see another day, but it all depended upon my research. Slow going and only 10% of the way there. Now starving, I continued my work. I decided to speed up the research by building a small room. This would raise the speed and give me more time. I gathered the materials and placed them on the walls. In just a few minutes, I was done with a small lean-to. A steel hut in which to do my work. Roofed and sealed, I could remove roof where I needed to do my research. To bring light into the hut, I reinstalled my research bench and moved it into the hut. This sped research by a small clip, but with malnutrition mounting at about 40%, There wasn't much time left to risk it. Better the cat than me. And although it was a mood buff, survival was more important. Goodbye, Caesar. I knew you well. A sad end, but necessary for survival out here on the ocean. The yield would keep me alive before the first harvest. I ate Caesar, and it kept me alive. Fortunately, Seaman and Caesar hadn't bonded yet, so this was the last chance before any catastrophic failure, and that gave me a full stomach. I had just barely come by on the resources I had. And in a vast, endless blue, I was a small speck of green, subsisting, surviving, but now lacking companionship and confined to a cold, hard metal cell. Where would be my solace, my retreat? On the end of the 5th of April, May, nearly about to break, stuck inside, sleeping outdoors. This was not a good life, so I set him off to bed and prayed for a stable morning. I ordered the harvesting at last. This would mean some food, and it would satisfy our animal needs. Rice. Glorious rice. Would it be enough? That would set Seaman in just a good enough mood to get by. I started growing some trees along the shoreline as well. The majestic saguaro cactus, dancing in the ocean breeze. The burning passion for the work kept Seaman engaged, and it was his respite for those few days. With more rice eaten and more saguaro cacti planted, the short-term fight was over, and Seaman would survive another day. Now a glorious rain, ablutions from the heavens, upon a colony mired in endurance. The rice flourished under the rains. Whether it's luck, providence, or just some freak act of nature, it do be that way sometimes though. Now with malnutrition dropping, it was actually safe for Seaman to have a catharsis. Go ahead, Seaman. Go ahead and have a catharsis. Do what you need. Do whatever you need. Or just go to sleep. That's okay too. We love you, Seaman. Everyone's rooting for you. With that, I finished planting the rest of the island. And in fact, there was no catharsis, but rather a bountiful harvest. The research continued, now with greater momentum than before. What had we overcome? The days passed in painstaking research. Once, I went on a daze. Heat stroke from a heat wave nearly killed me. But ultimately, I escaped with what I had sought. A catharsis. This would last for 3 days and keep me in good spirits, but at least I had time now. A person crash-landed on the island, Zen, a defector, and lightning struck, lighting my crops on fire. The blaze was sudden, and it spread. Unable to contain it, I decided to simply cut my losses and destroy the crop so that it couldn't spread. I would lose the rice, but at least I wouldn't lose the whole island. I still had enough to get me through a couple of weeks. Knowing that fire has a 2-tile spread radius, I quickly ran to destroy 2 squares worth of crops. I hauled in the last of the rice, preventing the fire spread. I barely managed to save the bed, and the fires went out, leaving me a small crop of rice, and more importantly, saving myself from any burns. I removed the bed from the spread of the fire, and extinguished the last cinders. Some of the crop was saved, but I had averted disaster. I didn't have time to rescue Zen in all of the commotion, so I just decided to take his clothing. This would further insulate me from the heat at the equator. With that, I replanted the rice and started anew. At least my saguaro cacti had been saved. The island was refreshed. And since I didn't want to leave out a dead body, I dug a grave at the foot of my bed for Zen. This would at least keep him 6 feet under. There he rested. But at last I had finished my main work. Terraforming was researched. And while I couldn't place down soil directly, I could at least put down some soft sand where there were food piles. If I could build only a few feet out in the water, I could claim more wood. And that meant more land. Just then, another person crash-landed. However, I didn't consider Lucas much of a threat. He had 35 days of paralytic aphasia. In the meantime, I began building my bridge out toward more of the wood. In just a couple of hours, and after downing one of the trees, I made my way over to a whopping 64 wood out in the water. With just a little bit more terraforming work, I was able to build a platform of sand out in the water. Along with that, I built a horseshoe pin inland. It would keep me entertained and probably mentally stable for the next few days. Perhaps more importantly, now with more land, I found that I was able to store more supplies. I started constructing sandbars out in all directions. And building my way out to the last of the driftwood in the water, I stored it all in a new storage hut. Now I could keep the gold and other meals in there, and then roof it. I started hauling the larger chunks of rock from the water to make way for my construction plans. If I could move them over to my other island, I could keep this as storage island. I finished up the storage shed on my new island. I carried back the rocks to my rock storage island, and before long I had a small set of buildings going. Unfortunately, most of the animals on the other islands weren't long for this world, but what remained could survive on what little was left of the land. That's not to say that there was much left though. Maybe a few rats with some nutrition available. Since there was a nearby ruin with ancient marble walls, I decided to start building my way over to it the next day. This would be my domicile. Everything prior to this had just just been for short-term needs. Short of larger raids, the biggest threat to my existence was still fire. So I built yet another platform of sand, skirting to the sides of the rock chunks. This new path would raise the possibilities. Step by step, it would probably take the entire day, but it was worth it. At this rate, each log needed to be delivered one by one. And then another crash land. Jared. Finally, having made my way over to the island, I could start to accommodate some prisoners. I nursed Jared back to full health, and then I made my way onto the stately isle. Here I'd have more room to grow and expand. First, I filled in the waterlogged tiles. I made a small wood stockpile, and then I finished filling in the gaps. Once I had dried the interior of water, I could go about my main plan to construct furnishings inside. After renovating, I couldn't actually build sandstone on the sand. I needed stronger foundations capable of supporting it. But knowing that other tasks were more urgent, I did my best to copy down the basic design in wood and respect the original architecture. The ocean temple was nearly restored, and Neptune would rejoice in me. I repaired the walls, and then I made moves to deconstruct the steel hut, knowing that I'd need this valuable resource later, and it was in high demand. So removing the pieces, I prepared a stove on one side of the temple. Completing the stove, I'd need wood, but I'd be able to grow some. With that, I had a positive surplus of rice. I moved my research indoors, completed the rice harvest, and I slumbered. The temple was finally complete, and in its honor, I renamed Jared Krakatoa, in honor of the land that saved us from the harsh sea. Seaman and Krakatoa. The temple was done. Another person fell from the sky. This one named Synth, hostile, but I just didn't think it was worth it to save her, so I let her die. But first, I donned a new garb. I don't know why Seaman decided to put on a parka in the middle of the ocean, but I was alright with it. It looked very becoming on him. And then a miracle. Krakatoa rose from his slumber, as if destined, and then he immediately put on some clothes. I didn't blame him. This wasn't good. Jared, aka Krakatoa, was pretty upset, having been left outside as an undergrounder for so long, but he gladly donned a new parka for some reason again. I moved him underneath the temple. He would be much happier inside. And then I began work on a great hall of dining. There they could feast and be merry. Seaman and Krakatoa worked in great conjunction, and then I made moves to begin expanding the Cactus Island, for in this way, we would acquire even more land in the sea and strengthen our island. Upon the sand, we built soil, filling in the gaps, and we fertilized the soil to enrich it. And so over the next few days, we expanded north. They worked and expanded the isle, making way for more and more cacti into the night. Yet another transport pod crashed. This gentleman had been shot in the face, but I didn't like him, so I just let him die again. This meant, yes, another grave. Since graves were becoming a new theme, I decided to dig up all of the bodies and just make a graveyard instead. This meant several fresh corpses, which didn't make anyone happy, but I can assure you, it meant lots of long-term planning. Krakatoa was displeased at the sight. Another person fell out of the sky. I also didn't like him, so I let him die too. Now what we had was a large garden. We even had space on the southern half to make way for rice production again. Seeing that the heat was beginning to tax my colonists as well, I planted a couple of new garden patches, both for cotton as well as for heel root. But we still needed steel. I wanted to set up with at least the main resources we'd need to expand. The fun part of Seablock is that you can see all of the resources at your disposal at just a glance. There was a large island next to me, but it was mostly sandstone. Various slate and sandstone chunks floated out in the water, but there was some steel lying just to the south. Someone else fell out of the sky. Julian Shorty Monty. I took him in. He was allowed to stay. On the 1st of December, we finished our farms, and we neared completion renovating the temple. Krakatoa and Seaman made such a great team. On the 5th of December, 45 days or 3 seasons after we had started, I decided to start researching geothermal power. The island, the heat, and Krakatoa would supply us with energy. Once we had energy, the horizons were boundless. I decided to make this our ultimate project. Yes, our island was fertile. Even grasses and new flora were popping up out of the sand. Another woman named Alina fell out of the sky, but she was also incapable of dumb labor. I was incapable of saving her. Shorty and Alina both died. A woman named Olga landed on A lot of people were landing on this island. This necessitated yet more graves. Olga joined, and apparently she was Krakatoa's ex-wife. If people kept falling to the island at this rate, eventually our graveyard would expand over to the components just a few islands away. So I decided to prepare clear the way. There we could obtain much-needed components for machinery to realize the vision of Krakatoa. I made dusters to keep us cool. But ultimately what kept me going was the knowledge that eventually I'd automate more of this manual labor and set us off to some components. And so we built out into the water, and on day 55, Seaman was struck by lightning, a sign from Providence perhaps. Engulfed in flame, he was nearly stricken again. Bad luck, call it. But maybe it's because our colony was just so electrifying. Yes, we had come a long way, and we were near journey's end. Nearly 1 year into survival, and we were finally reaching the components. We had laid concrete down on our walkways and kept the temple pure and clean. Finally, we had arrived at the components, and we made moves to mine them out of the cliff. After all of that hard work, we finally utilized the wind. Then we ran some probably very ill-advised power cables along the water, constructed the turbine, and we used all of that to power 2 lamps lighting up our home. And then there was the cleaning and the housekeeping. The psychic drones ended. With the house very impressive and in good repair, we cleaned the aisle, and then the long research began. Yes, our Seablock had come a long way. No longer just a block, but rather an entire colony. And then after 1 year and 1 season, 75 days in, we finally researched geothermal power, mining out the last few components. With that, we were well on our way to a whole network of electricity. Resourceful and intuitive, we had conquered the challenge presented by the Storm God, and we were better for our wear. The colony expanded, and I have to say, this is probably one of the most interesting and enjoyable ways I've ever played Rimworld. And with enough creativity, the possibilities are nearly endless. I hope you got some ideas, and hope you try your own Seablock playthrough. The living dead are among us. They are one of the greatest threats to humanity. What will you do when the zombies come? No defense was built to last forever, and tonight might be your very last one on Earth. What will be your plan B when they come clawing at your doorstep? I was whisked off to see if I couldn't make a habitable place for 4 colonists in Rimworld for 100 days among hordes of the undead. Every day they grow in number until we take the fight to them. Life is existential torture, but at least these walkers give meaning to the survival of every unforgiving minute. What decisions would we make to save ourselves from the ever-growing threat of the undead? I survived in Rimworld for 100 days of the zombie apocalypse, and here's what happened. We crash-landed from outer space escape pods several days before the arrival of the living dead on the map, a large mountainous region whose west side was rife with minerals. We equipped our weapons, revolvers, bolt-action rifles, in Rimworld what's considered primitive technology, open areas off to the east and the south, and a small pocket to the north. We would settle on the western side of the map, with no zombies to fear. Gathering our senses to the best of our abilities, the answer was inward. Time was of the essence. Only 2 days and 21 hours before the zombies arrived. We got to work and constructed a temporary shelter. Our men were hardened, wily devils, but who wants to sleep on the ground in the middle of the forest? And so it was decided that the labor be divided among the 4 of us. Some men hunting, meeting our short-term needs, while others would carve into the mountain for later security from the zombies. We slept that night in some makeshift beds. The next day, the operations continued deeper into the mountain. While just outside at the cave entrance, we accounted for all of the supplies on our important expedition. By the end of the day, we were set up royally with all the conveniences anyone could ask for. The architecture of my original design was intended for utility, not aesthetics. But as we made our way deeper under the mountain, we began to make for ourselves a life of greater domestic comfort, carving out rooms for storage of our goods, as well as wide hallways up and down which to parade. Yes, it seemed as if everything was just going hunky-dory in the colony. Until the zombies emerged. They came from the map edges, underground and sideways. It wasn't long before all of the local wildlife was maimed or brutally murdered. Whatever wasn't bitten was beaten and killed within a few days. We worked undisturbed in our cave for now. If we could extend the power of our creation out to the cave entrance, we'd be safe. If you're creative with your defenses, you might not ever have to fight your enemy. So we began to outfit the cave with all manner of traps. And as the rains outside washed down on the ghouls, we comfortably rested on the inside of our cave. While these were just only the first sprinklings of the horde to come, we started off good, and that was a good place to be. But the chaos of the outer world was driven inward, and the last of the wildlife came into our cave, seeking refuge and revenge. A mountain lion, a bad omen, and it was the last natural thing we'd see for a while outside of the mouth of our cave entrance. We posted a watch for the next few days with our long-range bolt-action rifle, With the integrity of the terrain itself, the zombies wouldn't pose much of a threat for a while. We turned our attention to longer-term needs: food, safety, and sanity. The length of the cave entrance afforded security. If we dug and ventured a little deeper into the mountain itself, we could carve out individual bedrooms and give ourselves some personal space. For the last day of the glory of nature had passed for a long, long time, and now we turned to our own creations, man-made machines and fixtures to keep ourselves secure. The Underdark of our own fabricated world, separate from the natural one, and now removed. No one came in, and no one went out. A simple life, but you could say that it led us to become a little stir-crazy. The brightest on our color palette was the blood of our enemies. The resources we had pulled from the earth lay there scattered in our one storeroom. We depended on a wood-fired generator with precious little wood for our power source, for there was nothing else to generate power underground. So commenced a great hibernation. Nothing came in, and nothing went out, save the rocks we needed to get out of our underground shelter. But the nights raged on, and the ghouls didn't rest, festering, creeping, and clawing their way ever further inward, desiring our flesh. Our number was 4. We could multitask. 2 men defending the cave entrance, 2 men working and making progress inward. Occasionally we were afforded an easy break by traders coming inward, and if they made it to the compound, they'd usually dropped all of their goods before they'd arrived at us. The lucky ones died on the spot, and for the unlucky ones, it was only a matter of hours, or days sometimes, before they turned. For the undead, like the wind, were tireless, more a force of nature than anything else. But when traders would leave, we welcomed the opportunity to scavenge what resources we could outside of our cave, for we'd be stuck in here a long, long time to come. And if you've ever been stuck, you know the best way out is to get busy. And so we became self-sufficient there in the base. Biofuel refining, hydroponics, these were just a handful of the technologies we researched. But you know what they say, the fool needs to see the fire underneath him to be motivated to save himself. The resourceful man, keenly aware of the little time he has in the world, gets working right away to unfasten his shackles. And so we busied ourselves underground, every day carving out what little leverage we could to make of that crease in the wall a home, a bastion of defense. Now we had stretched it for every fiber of its potential to sustain our livelihood there, living in a crack in the wall like explorers, finding themselves doomed to a most abominable fate in their mortal coil. The threats of the outer world and the living dead were ceaseless and terrifying. And though a life trapped in rock was certainly not one worth living, at least as it sounded on paper, the alternative was mere moments of inhuman violence. To recount what inhumanities we witnessed just outside the walls of our cave, so much depended upon the most unlikely of resources. Steel for our turrets was as essential as air to breathe. But when you have nothing else, you at least have teamwork. While one set of hands fired a bolt-action rifle between the eyes of encroaching ghouls, another set of hands reloaded. And yet another set of hands was busied reloading the barrel of a turret, and another one carving its way deeper into the mountain, seeking more steel and more opportunities. For the resources within the mountain constituted our ticket outward, to the freedom which lay without our de facto home. Meanwhile, outside, nature was given back to that primal struggle of constant combat. Ghouls battled raiders, battled megasloths, battled thrumbos. We exempted ourselves from the fight through a layer of turrets. In an odd coincidence, one ghoul conveniently carried with it layers of the stickiest of goo, trailing layers of intractable slime beneath it, for all passers-by to struggle and surrender. The slime was certainly sticky, globulous goop, and it made for another natural layer of defense from all life seeking to take refuge in our cave, which turned out to be a threat perhaps even more serious than the ghouls themselves. The pieces were played, and the first game had ended in a stalemate. We were alive enough to count ourselves better off than those who had ventured outside the cave, but the journey continued. The ghouls were making their way closer to our inner cave in a most unanticipated way, and finding any steel necessitated the strip mining of the deepest caves to discover the innermost riches of that crack in the wall on which we had embarked. It would be quite a while before we once again saw the light of day and took part in the glorious, bountiful riches of mineral deposits and vegetation that were still cropping up and out for grabs in the main world. Being forced to stay in one location while you watch the world around you move on by is psychological torture. The deeper we mined, the longer our hand reached out toward the inhospitable world around us and tamed it into something suitable for habitation.
we stared aghast as zombies killed a thrumbo.
Around this time, we resolved to weather the winter air. Seeing our breath indoors was enough motivation to undertake an expedition back out into the sunlight. We braved the treading of that sticky goo about our cave entrance in search of a few valuable assets laying in the sunlight, unclaimed and up for grabs out there in no man's land. A heavy SMG, a splendid prize. The hunt was on, and we were the masters of the hunt. Now we could take the fight to them, but for now, we rested. For it's said that the flame that burns brightest burns out the fastest, and you're better off quitting, or at least scaling back when you're already in the lead. Mother Nature, seeing that our work outside was complete for now, laid a winter blanket over the earth all around us, and we tidied our home inside, adding upgrades and scaling up to prepare for the spring thaw when we'd begin to take back the world around us, up until now given over to strife and murder. We cleaned the caverns and made them ready for spring. Some good fortune. While we mined, the zombies mining into our base from a most undesirable angle chanced to crack their way into an ancient underground danger and fought the inhabitants within. The miner was killed, buying us the precious time we needed to weather the winter inside of our home. They consumed the flesh of those they felled. Seeing that there was a lull, and that we had one clear shot before the spring thaw began, we acted fast, and set out with one more expedition into the cold air, this time outfitted with incendiaries to bathe our enemies in fire and cleanse the winter world of their taint. Our fire turrets were in place, and there was a short window of opportunity before the next horde washed upon the walls of our caverns. There was a clear path through the goop before us, but time was ticking, and it was dangerous. So with a little treading through that sticky goo, we infiltrated the areas they'd so overwhelmed and snuck into that ancient underground tomb. With just a few tosses of our Molotov cocktails, their doom was sealed, and we survived the harshest winter we'd ever known, emerging from that wintry cocoon outfitted with all the steel and components we'd need to get a foothold in the spring. The world itself was now transformed, a ghost of its former self. Even the quiet of the Muffalo had been disturbed by the festival of fire that bathed the world in destructive light while the snowstorms raged over that abysmal apocalyptic world. We had invented, in the interim, entirely new ways to maim and murder during that winter. And perhaps as just desserts, our own primitive turrets were ultimately destroyed by their very own destructive patterns. The ghouls frenzied and raged, engulfed in fire, bathed in flame, giving light to our very own creations. But by the time the rains of spring washed away the snow of the cold, we had consolidated our destructive weapons of war into just a couple autocannons to punch out hope from anyone who would dare venture near our home. The plans were all coming together. We exited the winter with the world strip-mined, as if the manifestation of some geological catharsis. The sky shed tears, and it ended with a great purification. The earth was wiped clean with a fresh slate, and as cool raindrops fell on the dirt, cleansed of the blood of our enemies, we busied ourselves in safe range of our autocannons and repurposed our components that kept us alive in the winter for more productive, constructive uses in the outside world. We emerged to build new footholds in the open, fresh air, living once again in the woods and among the new fauna that had migrated to the region from somewhere safer. Another colonist joined us, and we punched our way back out into the world under the righteous vigilance of the weapons we had diligently constructed and fussed over that winter. Our creations had literally paved for a new way of life, and despite emerging threats from the east and the south, I felt confident. For now, we no longer had to sit back helplessly as we watched traitors have their eyeballs devoured by festering ghouls, but rather we could defend their eyeballs with righteous, true aim. And so we constructed outposts about the map and took back the land as redeemers do. Everyone was safe. We constructed a wall on the north, clearly marking the bounds from where we had come. From then on, our distance from the threat would grow until it faded from view on the horizon. So, 100 days gone by, but what lay ahead? Hello. There's little else that excites me more than the feeling of discovery when embarking upon a new adventure. Rimworld is usually about a colonist trapped on the ground, trying to get back out into space. Instead, what about being trapped in space and trying to get back to Earth? For a new challenge, I decided to embark upon a new adventure with Rimworld's Save Our Ship Derelict ship start. But instead, I blew up the ship because it was too vast and complex to learn all at once. No, I wanted the ship to come down to its bare bones, its most granular building blocks. I'm calling this my Skyblock. The challenge is to use the scattered remaining resources left by the last ship in order to create a functioning space station and return to Earth's surface. Now we've just spawned in, but we need to be economical with our supplies. Tanks is currently in an EVA suit that's going to keep him alive while he's still in the vacuum of space, but is rapidly deteriorating after all the explosions. Almost the entire ship was destroyed, but there's still a lot we can salvage from. We're going to allow everything to start. Now that we've allowed all of the supplies, space is very dangerous. If exposed to the vacuum, you'll die in about 15 seconds. Experiments have actually taken place where a man was exposed to a vacuum for a short period of time. His saliva on his tongue began to boil. He doesn't have a lot of time and he's pretty stable. He's also happy to be in space, so I'm just going to set him to work for as long as possible until he gets his quarters set up. First things first, let's haul this steel out of the airlocks. That's one of them. And now this slag chunk. And now that the doors are cleared, it's locked at least from the vacuum outside. Though there's still no air, we'll need our life support system. We'll need to reinstall this lamp first, but there it is. And the next most urgent task is to take this life support system and install it here. You can just grab that from space. Then we'll refuel this chem fuel powered generator to get that online. And that gets the plants working. We're generating oxygen. And while the atmosphere in here is breathable, it's still freezing. Just as a starter colonist on land would have trees and water to pick from to build his own base, we have steel and plasteel out in the vacuum of space. We still have yet to mitigate the temperature and it's freezing inside. But some heat is being given off by the chem fuel generator. We need to make this environment livable for someone without an EVA suit, as ours is about to expire. The first thing we'll die of would be cold. We need some heaters to combat that and not die. The meals have also floated away. We'll need to collect outside of our ship if we want to survive much longer. One would think that heaters would be enough to protect you from cold. Well, no. Heat can also kill us. As it turns out, if we don't have a way of getting rid of the heat, we will literally cook in here like a microwave. But we're going to need to power all of this, so 2 more chem fuel generators it is. While it might not be so fast, it's going to make its way up to about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and it will go beyond that. Right now we have no way of getting heat out of our ship, it just stays in there. But in fact, our power grid isn't completely connected to our heat sinks. Now we have these 3: power, heat, oxygen. But we don't have any way of getting rid of the heat. We almost have enough to create a sustainable environment for life. So before we do anything else, we'll need to install powered ship hull where we had unpowered ship hull. That's good, now our heat sinks are working. The indoors is finally livable, now at 20 degrees. And it's a good start, but we don't really have that much time. We have only so much chem fuel and our suit is running out of condition every second. And with a little bit more work, we'll have 1 more room for our life. Each room's going to need to serve several purposes at first. Now with the room surrounded, we can add hull plating inside. And with just a bit of steel and plasteel, we shut out the vacuum of space. Tanks is now in a bad mood and is exhausted, but this will be his last task before we can have him take off his suit and relax. And they're just finishing up that room. It looks like this place is sealed off. Now with all that work done, we can allow him to come inside and take a nap. This room may still be cold, but he's now safe to remove his gear in his bedroom. We'll leave that on the floor because we don't want it degrading anymore, and we might need it later on for outdoor repairs. And while he sleeps, the outer room should start to warm up. There it goes now, it's pushing towards 0 degrees, and this is safe to walk in now. We can haul the meals back to the ship, and that's the last of them. Now we have 1 surviving horseshoe pin, which we'll install, otherwise we can't really go outside for any recreation. We'll become kind of stir-crazy in here for a while. Now we'll set up a new area called Life Pod, where we'll allow him to walk around inside. This is kind of how I imagine life would be if I lived in a tiny house. First I'd walk over here and clean. Then I'd walk over there and clean the other spot. After that, I'd probably go to bed and think about owning a larger house. Already he's getting chilly in this 1 compartment, but the temperature is going up from the other room. Even in space, he will need horseshoes, yes. Don't question it. Now we'll start by reinstalling this lamp. It seems to be hooked to the wrong power grid. And it looks like we got a red lamp for this room. I didn't even really intend that. I guess it was just what was left over. Now, as it stands, we're burning fuel. We have only the chem fuel that's left here, plus whatever we can find outside. If we want to get ourselves an unlimited source of power, we're going to need to research solar power. And if we want that, we're going to need a high-tech research bench and a multi-analyzer. Every second, we're burning fuel and using up food, too. A quick check shows that we need components and and gold. We're going to need to make another spacewalk now. We'll let him gather the required materials before we set off to work. So gathering the components from outside, we start our build, leveling in construction, and gathering the necessary components. The first item on our research will be life support. This leads up to EVA suits, and we can use the last of our hyperweave to create a replacement if we need it. The research begins, but we don't really have anything else to do. We just have to wait and hope that no other ships pass by. The EVA suit's removed to preserve condition as long as possible. And though we're alone, research is made short work of. We're in an advanced civilization, having made it to space, and our researcher has the maximum skill. He shouldn't have any trouble keeping up. After all, there isn't much else to do in space. That's enough research. Next will be a quick detour to solar panels. Not only does this give us solar generators for the ground, but also solar generators for a ship. There's a mountain of research ahead of us. Normally, on a colony this would be a peaceful time, but we're running out of meals, and so far we don't have any way of making more yet. We have to work fast. Thankfully, solar panels can give us renewable energy with only the sun, and we can use smelters to make use of these steel slag chunks. Donning the EVA suit, it's time to make another trip out, and that's enough for a smelter. We begin this work, making a few spacewalks, until at last we have enough for solar generators. We can build these on the bottom end of our ship. Now we have all three and they're hooked into our power grid. In the morning, they come out, and they start generating solar power. It's not a lot, but it's pretty reliable in space. But our gear is also getting lower in quality. We don't have much time left. But the good news is that the sun has unlimited power for us. I'm willing to take full advantage of it with an array of 3 more solar panels, and yet it's a waste if we can't make the best use of it. At the end of the day, the solar panels retract. Batteries will be the next quick research project. As long as we do a little bit of research each day, we'll keep our mind sharp. And since we're going to need a lot more power, we research capacitor arrays. This won't be our only project. Once we store power, then we're going to need to start growing food before we can get any further in our journey. Only once we've set up these basic necessities of life, then can we start worrying about defending ourselves and finally getting back to Earth. The human body wasn't meant for space, it evolved on Earth. And so we just kind of complete work marathons, staying up as long as we want, welding and working on the ship, trying to collect our resources before our suit springs a leak. It's more welding, but we're going to need room for a space garden out here. The next morning we trace out a design for what will be the ship's grow room. This is where we'll have crops. We'll worry about propulsion and fighting later on when we get to that. Hard to believe it, but it's been 15 days since our expedition launched, and an entire season has passed. We're still trapped out here. Next, it's time to restore hull plating. In both rooms, there's plenty to do. With that, we need to be mindful because we've been through many of the materials on the outside of the ship. And don't forget, we still need a rocket to get back down to Earth. The spare room is completed, and we're now ready to set up our capacitors. With that, the room is sealed and shut. It's safe to install one last heater, or 2 to be safe. Now the temperature is certainly low, but it's rising, and it's creating an environment livable for human life. Like a squirrel gathering nuts for the winter, we're now retreating indoors, and we'll complete the last of our work in here. But now we have a new problem. We have only 20 meals left. My 3 greatest fears are running out of food, running out of power, or just being stuck up here without the means of reproducing anything. And for some reason our power is dropping, so it's best to take out some insurance for these emergencies with new power. Our sun lamp is extremely power demanding. This thing is like a small city. We need capacitors to store the power. We'll start with a small capacitor. Capacitors have a huge energy supply, and we can keep drawing on them for a long time, even if something happens to our grid. Our helmet, though still there in case of an emergency, is really too low to use outside of our ship. If Tanks is exposed for even a few seconds to the vacuum, he'll die immediately. Next is a trip down hydroponics. Next will be another fabrication bench. We'll need to use this to craft another EVA suit for our major constructions outside the ship. But there's also a new danger. We aren't draining heat in one room and it's starting to cook like an oven. This is an immediate danger. Just in case of the worst case scenario, we'll put on the EVA suit. This is a time-sensitive task. We'll need to reopen the ship and add in 2 more radiators. So we retire our old EVA suit and helmet, and we begin crafting anew. We have strong crafting skill though, and we managed to get excellent quality. But now we're down to only 13 meals. We're really running low here. And since it's in perfect condition, and I think this will last us till the end, we'll leave him in an EVA suit and helmet for most of the rest of the time. As it stands, we still don't have any way of moving the ship. We complete hydroponics research, and it's the fresh feeling of striking out on a new project. I have made metal into an environment sustainable for plant life to grow. It's warm and safe in here, and the light will come on tomorrow to help them start growing. And as they say, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. When life gives you hyperweave sleeping rolls, make hyperweave EVA suits to walk around in, the only cloth that we really have available. We have enough to sustain life in here as it stands right now, but we still need to get back down to Earth, and there's more metal and plasteel outside. We need to collect it to create our shuttle bay. Now, if I may use this word, it's a comfortable life on the ship, and then we'll be getting back down to Earth after some research. And luckily, no other ships have tried to kill us during our time in space. The suit is completed, of normal quality. That's passable and it'll work. With the suit on, we can gather the last of the supplies. And Tanks also has recreational opportunities out there. We gather the last of the resources from outside of the ship. And before you know it, it's going to be time for our first harvest, so we'll get an oven ready. And we'll plan to stockpile the rice right in front of it. It's a simple task, but it's important. And if we can, we'll want to save some of these packaged survival meals for later. Now, our capacitor is fully charged, and this takes a long time. This is no small task. We've finished harvesting our rice, we didn't botch that much of it, and it's time to cook simple meals. Now he's sustaining his own life. And oddly enough, the advanced components do deteriorate. I don't know why without the exposure to oxygen, but we need to bring them in fast. It's just a matter of bringing things inside. Now it's a lot of crafting. Most of our research is done. But the good news is that we have tons of steel and plasteel, and these are the base resources needed to make more complex components that we're lacking. Fortunately, it's not that many advanced components to make. You could live a life up here above the Earth. But the sad news is that you couldn't get down if we didn't have enough to make a shuttle bay, and you'd be trapped forever. Which would be horrible. Absolutely horrible. I suppose until all of the components broke down, you would, need to repair the ship, otherwise you would just slowly suffocate up in space. I have to say, I wish I did a better job organizing the resources. I was in a bit of a panic at the beginning, but I wanted to make sure I didn't run out of oxygen or heat. But it's time for some smelting. We need to take account of just how many resources we have to get back down to the Earth. But just think of all that we've accomplished. Creating a pod of oxygen in a massive vacuum, establishing enough heat for life and to take off one's suit, food, plant growth, power, fuel, and now we even have a surplus. I think I can now see why astronauts are at high risk of going crazy in outer space. They pick mentally stable people for this job. All of the time, which has amounted to nearly 1 year, seems like only one day that has passed since I've been up here. All just one extremely long, interesting afternoon. Our last task will be to sharpen the saw intellectually. We've let enough time go by without doing any researching or thinking, and we still need rocket propulsion and personal shuttles to get back down to Earth. Normally, this amount of research would be a major grind for any other colonist, but for Tanks, who's a genius, it's more like a big speed run. Some time passes by, and finally we research rocket propulsion. But Save Our Ship features a lot of preliminary technologies we still need to go back and research. We're going to be in here for a while, so I'll take off the EVA suit and just do some research. Sit down and relax. Tank's research skill caps out. The irony here is that spending a lot of time in space is more like spending a lot of time underground. You're tucked away in a shuttle and you can never get out. So a lot of his mood debuffs are resembling those of someone trapped underground. Yes, it is long, soul-destroying work, but it's a heck of a lot of research to get where we're going, back down to Earth. I was looking for an architecturally fitting place to put our new shuttle bay. Looks weren't really a main priority this time, but I guess next time, or when we come back into the shuttle, I'll think more about that. Nonetheless, we have an appropriate location for our shuttle bay, and we can put that just off to the side of our ship, where we can launch shuttle pods down to Earth. It's a lot of component crafting, but I want to power this hull, as I intend to come back up to this ship later on, and use it as a main base. This is the reason we needed this suit. Now we can seal in this new compartment and prepare a safe place for our new personal shuttle bay. With work complete on the personal shuttle, it's time to start thinking about fuel. We'll need enough to get down to Earth and for a return journey as well. I fueled up the ship, and then I started research on guns and rifling. Now we have the option of building ourselves an assault rifle. It's a day pregnant with expectation now that we're up to building an assault rifle. Finally, we've maximized the use of our resources to get back down to Earth, and now we can set ourselves up for an even better landing knowing that we still have this base in space. This is why we saved all these packaged survival meals. It'll be best to bring these down with us. Though our ship could be stronger, we'll need to gather supplies down on Earth. And now it's time to launch. We could go anywhere, but since it's December-y, we'll make our way for the mountains down on Earth. There it goes. And what's most exciting about this to me is that it actually seems to take an orbit into account. Like, you don't just go straight down to the planet, but you need to rotate. But the planet's rotation is accounted for. Our ship arrives at its destination and lands safely. Now we can settle. The real journey begins. The number of flora and fauna right at our fingertips is overwhelming, and bringing home only a small sample, we could stake out a life for ourselves in space for many years to come. There are tribespeople to trade with, and valuable resources we can't find in space. But if we can get up there, that's back where all the action is happening. But I think that tanks will be happy here for a little while. It's a good practice sometimes to remove the things that you take for granted in life, so that you can learn to do a better job appreciating them. There's no other challenge that raises the stakes to quite the same degree as limited resources. It makes the mundane task of getting started in Rimworld into one of dire need and urgency. You must exercise thriftiness in situations that might otherwise seem lazy and lackluster. Your very life may depend upon allocating resources in an economical manner. For a challenge, I embarked upon a 30 by 30 cell grid in the hopes of building an entire functional colony on such a paltry square of land, stranded and alone. Can we survive a year and achieve prosperity? A land flowing with milk and honey? We crash-landed from outer space by the traditional Rimworld start, albeit this one was slightly more cramped. No rocks and little stone on the ground. We were essentially living in a junkyard, it seemed. The major advantage? We had many trees to chop down, and that would make for a renewable resource. Some of the oaks were ready to harvest, others were nearly fully grown, but there was enough junk lying around that it was more worthwhile to just take account of what we had. It was also quite cold outside. We'd need a heater before too long. Raider's our best melee fighter, so he took the plasteel knife, the flak jacket, and basically any other defensive items. McBride wasn't particularly good at anything, so I gave her the bolt-action rifle. Darcy, our best shot, took the revolver. That was all the weapons. The first item on my checklist. Every square of ground was precious, but there was one small area covered in slate, so this would probably be the wisest spot to build on. And with the least fertile soil in the region, I figured that would be the best spot for constructing. Laying out my building plans, I prepared the first hut. Most things would need to be completed in just one room to begin with. Everyone got to work hauling off the resources and clearing the site for building. While there was light available from the sky, I focused on constructing 3 beds. We finished off work on the beds, but we weren't very good at construction. After that, I created a stockpile zone in the ground right next to our house. By the end of the evening, we had the 3 beds constructed and the house finished. So we roofed off our house and sealed ourselves in. The first day concluded quietly, with many of the trees having been harvested, but many resources still lay scattered about. Since I didn't want the turkeys nearby to eat all of the meals around, I decided to hunt the turkey and the red fox living in the area. Sure enough, it took only a few minutes to bring it down. The red fox, too, didn't prove much of a threat. Nothing too dangerous yet. So we hauled in the last of the resources and went off to bed. The first day finished, and just the 3 of us and our cat living together in this cell. I got a head start on planting, and staved off starvation by planting rice in the bottom right corner of the cell. The soil was healthy, and though it was cold outside, soon it would warm up once we reached the summer. I set about hunting the local ibex does that had wandered into the region. It was really an ambiguous question, a journey of discovery and mysterious trepidation. Would the region itself be sustainable for men? Suitable for habitation? Randomly, throughout the first few days, various local wildlife would wander into the region and graze upon the grass outside of our rudimentary hovel. I took pains to purge the ground of the traces of mankind left there, mostly large pieces of metal, now cracked and left in disrepair by their late stewards. Probably left floating out to a most abominable fate, somewhere shot down on that exoplanet. Buzzing noises of productivity and interest emanated from our small square hut out on that flat ground. Although we were limited in space, we could use our minds to transcend our earthly conditions, for knowledge knows no limitations. Thus drew to a close the second day, and with it our imposition of right angles on the rough tendrils of nature. We slaughtered any animals that wandered into the region, and we tucked off into bed, with the world a little more awakened. The next day when we awoke, I set about constructing the most basic of defenses. A simple trap hallway provided all the defense we needed from raiders attacking our compound. Thus did we construct, except our construction skill was too low to build wooden spike traps yet. An embarrassment. This would require a lot of work. But there were still oodles of ruins dotting the flat wastes. I greeted every problem of paucity with the same level of interest as an engineer fitting a square peg into a round hole, so to speak. If I couldn't find the ingredients, I could fabricate them from some smaller, more granular elements. a visitor wandered into the region. Something to trade? It wasn't much, but we needed the components. We did a little trading, accepted what he had to offer, and then let him go on his way. The next day, we gathered the last of the resources from the area and set them all out in one major pile, for we'd need a good deal of indoor space to get this colony up and running. We finally reached the construction skill to fabricate traps. Then we made the area clean and orderly. We finished off the day by walling in the rest of the resources. After all, we'd been losing much of the meat we had rotting away in storage. The compound had grown and things seemed sustainable, but we still lacked much of the technology we needed to scale upward and leverage what we had been using. And if I were going to begin producing microprocessors, I would need to sift through the rare earth and metals from the ground. All this is an analogy, but certainly not all that far off from the reality. Still, there's little room for living in the present when you're off on your own and in the wilderness. You begin to realize why so much of the human brain is adapted to worry rather than feel gratitude. While it might pay dividends to practice a little more gratitude and spend a bit less time worrying about things in modern-day society, I can't say that the same can hold true while living in nature. Worrying about the future is rational, and the foodstuffs rotting in one's fridge is more a cause for alarm than it would be in your household or mine. We could work around it for now, but it was in my attention. To process the stone chunks, we created a stone cutting table. It wouldn't make for much, but it was another construction project, and we needed electricity going soon. After all, now we'd completed research on batteries. The next task would be to research tree sowing. We needed to reliably turn over trees and other crops in the region. That was when we were raided by the raptors. I stood in the doorway and watched as she died. Absolutely fantastic. Fantastic victory. The celebration was immediate. We dumped the dead body into the corner of the map. It would need to stay there for a while. With my colonists going mad, the focus of attention drifted toward innocuous activities like horseshoes. Mindless distractions were a respite from the daily insanity. At last, an opportunity to improve and beautify the main room. Thus, we constructed power conduits through wood into our walls. A makeshift defense for right now, but it would be necessary. With the wind turbine completed, we cut down the nearby trees and got to generating power. Now we had light by which to research, and we could go about our tasks more quickly indoors. The next day, we hunted some deer that had entered the region. I began to question whether animals would continue wandering around, though. Was it worth my time to construct all these workshops and butchering tables? Or would my days be better spent working on technology toward greater needs of an ever-growing population? There's a reason hunter-gatherers, after all, were rarely able to settle down in a region for an extended period of time. I couldn't help but see our development as a microcosm of society, our very planet. What would be our fate? Could we avoid it if we made certain decisions and not others? So while the outdoor temperature was a scalding 98 degrees, the inside of our fridge cooled and cooled. Next, we constructed a battery. Now we could store any wind power we had raised. Along with that, an electric smelter with which to reuse our slag that had fallen from the sky. Now we had renewable ways of getting steel and food. Slag and other materials could be smelted for more useful purposes. The very next day, a raider attacked. Setting fire to our fields was only the start. To save the fields, we went in for the kill. In the ensuing debacle, we sustained only minor injuries to the eyeballs. Before long, we were processing all of the resources that had lain there in a heap for so long. Anything could be reused, dismantled, and recrafted. And we'd finally reached decent room quality on our barracks. Finally, with tree sowing research, now we could take over the area, really fill the place with cash crops. And then dinner arrived. 6 gazelles, non-violent and waiting to be eaten. It would be a large dinner. I wish I could recommend this challenge. I love the idea of taking nothing and making something out of it. There's nothing quite as satisfying, after all, as the act of creating. It's what man was put on this earth to do. But like most of you, I am not immune to fire, or having my flesh violently burned off when a boom rat decides to make of my home a barbecue on the 4th of July. It came in the evening, tiptoeing nonchalantly onto the spike traps we had laid out. I waited, paralyzed by fear. It exploded like magnemite. The result was outrageous. Fires cleansed the land. This was not good. So the fires spread, and then a rain began, thankfully. I don't know what we would have done without the rain, but scarier than any raid were boom rats, boomalopes. Fortunately, we did have enough for another wind turbine. But to be quite frank, sometimes we make efforts to demonstrate to ourselves in our minds that we're in control of the world around us, while it's really nature that's in charge, and we're merely guests here on the land. Any sense of control we have is merely an illusion. We merely influence our fates. We nearly burned to death that day. I killed every last boomalope out of fear for our safety. I hate them and I regret nothing. So we had made it through the fires. But we recovered, and the next day, we repaired. I set about the task of constructing bedrooms for our colonists so they could live separate lives, small and private. I succeeded. The most sustainable way of making money continued to be hunting down all of the local wildlife. It just kept coming. We played horseshoes on the corpse of an alpaca. We received a message that a 22-year-old slaughterer named Joe was being chased by 2 man-hunting squirrels. Man-hunting squirrels are no joke. He entered. He was pretty good, by our standards. Zoons, a slaughter that sent me careening into an existential crisis. How could squirrels, long allies of mankind, turn on us? It's not just me, though. If I'm being honest with you, I'm often led to a sense of ennui and anticlimactic tangential irony when I play Rimworld. I begin with visions of profound human achievement, tearing their way through my imagination in fantasies of electric possibilities in science, curing disease, harnessing nuclear power, traveling to space, all on a square of land that could hardly hold a porta-potty. But soon it devolves into rationing the scarce, rotting squirrel meat in the farthest reaches of our wooden freezer during an ill-timed solar flare. I am not a smart man, but I have good common sense. It was time to stop living like savages. We moved our steel to an outdoor stockpile. It didn't matter if the steel was inside or outside, it was just steel. Once we had that done, we could focus on hunting rare exotic animals. The next day I saw a major opportunity. Exotic goods may be amazing, but what might be more amazing was that exotic animals had wandered into the region. The strangers were very well armed. I decided to provoke the Thrumbos in an effort to get the strangers help. The Thrumbos were outraged. I can't say that I regretted any of it, but more important than anything else was putting out the fire. The visitors thought it would be a great idea to toss some Molotovs on a small map. Fire is no joke, especially when only 2 out of 4 of your colonists can extinguish fires, and your visitors don't want to help put out the fire that they started, because you got many of their people killed. Eventually, we did manage to contain much of the blaze. Until then, a lightning storm managed to put out more fires. One more rain fell on us. With the colony only just narrowly spared, I decided to divert our resources to researching fire foam. That was more than enough fire for now. It was also a Pyrrhic victory. We had the body of only 1 Thrumbo to profit from. So the colony continued in the rain. From fire foam to muffalo hunts, it all came back to the question: how can we use limited resources, space, and events to raise uncharacteristically large amounts of wealth on such a small space of land? I was determined to live at least a year and significantly prove our wealth, security, and every other facet of our livelihoods, all the while proving to myself that we could do so within the confines of a small space. In a sense, Rimworld has always been an interesting game to me because it's just as much an RPG as an economic simulation. There's the world of expanding and industrializing, covering more and more land in larger fields or mines. But then there's also a world of characters' skill development, largely left up to the imagination, which is more at the forefront of attention, being restricted to such a small area. The rest of the colony proceeded more or less as you might expect any failed enterprise to continue. Losing is fun, and even when you're winning, it feels like you're losing, to be honest with you. We had meat all over the ground in the fridge. I mean, all of my inventions worked, but just barely. Just look at this place. It's a mess. There's lightning striking everywhere, fire extinguisher, excrement on the ground, whatever it is. But that's not to say that I didn't take great pains and pleasure in clawing my way up the tree of technology. And as winter set in, ignore the pile of dead bodies in the upper right corner and focus on the jackets we were making. I used exploit after exploit to wring out every last bit of skill we could acquire from those spare resources lying around. It all culminated in the building of a solar panel. Yes, a single solar panel. Amazing. You see, there's something wrong with me. I know too much about Rimworld. I know that it's more efficient to cut a hole in the roof and let snow in if you're wearing a jacket than it is to have a light bulb and a heater. That being said, civilization continues to advance under me. On day 41, we bought an assault rifle from a traveling merchant. A happy addition to our arsenal. I got lucky when literally a gold meteor fell out of the sky for us to mine out. And one fine evening, hallelujah, an answer to my prayers. A bulk goods trader from the Biotech Union, known for its bulk goods. I sold the copious piles of meat being refrigerated in our living room in exchange for reliable slate blocks. Now we could finally do something about the dead bodies in the upper right corner. Some would say, no, ambiguous, build an incinerator. I find this to be a more efficient, reliable method. Just build a miniature stone house for all of the dead bodies and then throw a Molotov cocktail inside. You'll be warmer in no time. And so it was. I've never been very organized. Soon everything was divided into clean rectangles. Very nice. We researched machining, and the spring thaw came before too long. What could be more satisfying than watching the transformation of the seasons in a land that was otherwise always the same? But our home turned with the earth. The dead bodies turned to ash when I set them ablaze, and it was just a week away from 1 year. 1 year. My goal I had set out with. Perhaps not a land flowing with milk and honey, more a land flowing with fire and solar panels. But with so many jackets on the ground, we were as a thrift shop, next to a deli that had milk and honey in it. Over the next days and weeks, we acquired all of the slate we needed to separate out the last of our goods into separate workshops and stockpiles. Yes, you too could have your own colony in a 30 by 30 square. One of our greatest gifts as humans is problem solving, using our minds instead of our bodies. The faculty of good planning allows us to rise out of the darkness of violence and ignorance and ascend into a throne of enlightened pacifism. For an unusually difficult challenge, I decided to play Rimworld as a group of tribal pacifists who abhor and shun violence, harming any other living being. No weapons, no instigating of bloodshed, and no meat in our diet because we're vegans. In a planet torn by war and raiding, is it possible to establish a thriving colony under these harsh parameters? I selected 5 tribal colonists and embarked on my journey. On the first day, I set out my plans. The ultimate goals? 1. Cultivate a vegan food source in a world where meat is not an option, but an abhorrent transgression against nature. 2. Engineer a well-oiled machine of a colony, where my colonists can thrive and do their best work. And 3. Secure our base from any threat in the most non-violent way possible that deters attackers or subdues them so that we can reform them and release them back to their people. On the first day, we spawned into a fertile valley, lowly and impoverished without a single possession. We were mere guests at the table of Mother Nature. Many forms of ownership are wrong and bad, but everything we held was shared in communion for the sake of common prosperity. The valley was all we needed to defend ourselves. Washingbeard, Sitara, Asana, Babar, and Ichabod, our faithful Pooch, Wise Guy, our beloved elk, Petulia, and who could forget Amos, the monkey. In Rimworld, nowhere is safe, so our only defenses were a set of blunt traps designed not to draw their victims' blood, but rather restrain them. Time was ticking, and if you've ever lived like a vegan for a few days, you know you get hungry really fast. The first operation was planting. We need to cultivate a vegan diet to sustain ourselves and even thrive. The fertilest of fields were placed beside a stockpile room that would ultimately evolve into our refrigerator later on. It was deemed that this was the most efficient layout. A temporary stockpile would have to wait just to be walled later on. And though wood wasn't necessarily the most desirable material, it was all that we had at the moment. Meter by meter, we built up a solid foundation. By nightfall, we finished planting our crops and returned into sleep in that makeshift shelter for the night. Day 2. Having landed with no food stockpiled, gathering berries was our only option, for we did not wish to intentionally harm any of the local animals, no matter how small. We cleared out the home and stockpiled wood and berries, whatever we could use to get ourselves started. And though weak with hunger, it was a better alternative than drawing blood and doing harm, even if we suffered massive food poisoning in the process. And suffer massive food poisoning in the process we did indeed. To combat it, we built a kitchen on the side, as an offshoot of our would-be refrigerator. But time flies when you're vegan, and so does vomit. I was thankful when we reached day 3. At dawn, I began penciling out what would become our future colony. No challenge is impossible, and with the right architectural layout, any colony can work. Since we depended entirely upon plant-based food sources, we would need to be well planned. The S stands for stockpile and the W for workshop. All of these were planned rooms. We could begin cutting stone blocks upon which to lay the foundation for the rest of the base. But first we needed to research this essential technology. Yes, a single cold snap or failing to properly preserve our foods could signal death. The colony would not be beautiful, but functional at first, with the inputs meeting the outputs, minimizing the walking distances, and ultimately making possible that essential feature, security. How would pacifists defend themselves? With the food piles shrinking, it all came back to that great gift we have as humans: problem solving. So in communion, we began tidying our food sources until that first threat, a maddened gazelle, emerging from the underbrush. Not wishing to do harm, but only preserve our own safety, we ensnared the gazelle instead of killing it in a blunt trap designed to subdue the beast without drawing its blood. Due to the unfortunate laws of motion and forces, the gazelle's front right leg was completely destroyed by the trap. And though the beast perished, its final moments were marred by transgressions of violence. We washed our hands and laid it to rest, having performed the smallest possible necessary intervention in order to preserve our colony from destruction. How would we fare with humans? Speak of the devil. When dawn rose on the 6th day, a woman named Purple assaulted us. Fortunately, we had prepared liberally for this occasion. She was ensnared, but huzzah, non-lethally. Though shoddy in its construction, we prepared a cell in which we would nurse her back to full health and release her home to her people. Unfortunately, her entire right leg was just destroyed by the trap. But at least she was alive, having intended to kill us. And while she healed, we researched new technologies. We had drawn too much blood from our aggressors, with the intention only that our enemies learn from their mistakes and be forgiven, released back to their own people alive and well. Could we, through technology, require less forceful measures to defend ourselves? Thus, any resources that would have been spent on weapons or armaments were instead utilized to research and develop our colony into an economic powerhouse. We took upon ourselves roles that would enhance our natural proclivities. Asana the planter became the root holder. Babar, brain of the operation, became our leader and speech giver. And Sitara, clan mother, took the role of the bringer of love. Sketches materialized into blueprints, and our base was constructed despite the treachery of raiders. You see, if the economy is strong enough, no one can even come near enough to touch you, I'm afraid. And although a few perished to our blunt traps, they brought it upon themselves. The rest of the time they were maimed, or hopefully, merely just bruised. Some of them lost a finger or toe, but it was all worth it for their reform. We continued building these traps, and recaptured the guilty sinners. Once they were healed and bandaged, they could be released back to their people. Kill them with kindness, they say, especially if you literally kill them with kindness. But over time, I was confident that neighbors would grow to learn of our charity, and perhaps even decide to become friends instead of enemies. Over time, I began to welcome the occasional raid. You see, when a neighboring enemy sent over a raid, they expected their warriors to die, so they weren't angered by the loss of 1 or 2 souls. But I rejoiced at every assailant who was non-lethally snared by our traps, since it offered us an opportunity to bump our relations with that enemy clan and establish trust. Once we released 10 or 12 captives, they would learn of our intent to inflict no harm upon them and stop sending raids. In turn, this gave us even more time to focus on improving and growing our GDP. We were the metaphorical Sigma males of that planet, too focused on our grind to bat an eye toward conflict that was below us. And we forgot everything except fine dining and breathing. On day 23, a Gorenlin tree sprouted in our midst, a sure sign that nature itself was conspiring to reward us for our radical pacifist ideology. We pruned and planted it, and then continued farming raiders, nursing them back up to full health and releasing them. Normally, recruiting a prisoner requires taking great pains to break a person's will, but this time, through our charity and goodwill, we were able to start breaking down those walls of hostility instead. Wounds, though often major, drew no blood from our well-designed traps. Therefore, as long as our fallen aggressors survived the initial mauling, there were absolutely no complications of injuries or infections, and the turnaround rate was 100%, as long as they were tough enough to withstand the bruising of their bones. But what goes around comes around, and karma has a nasty way of paying back those who would seek to do harm unto others. So we padded our defenses and prayed for our enemies. With every released prisoners, our diplomacy score grew by another 12 points. Get this number up from negative to positive, or at least 0. And the other factions would learn to stop sending raids our way. In the meantime, this paved way for other fun activities, like tree hugging. So as the hordes of the unwashed masses poured like water on our walls, desiring conflict, I reflected back on my goals. I had already accomplished my first one by cultivating a vegan food source, and if I'm the judge, I would say that the base was a well-oiled machine. Now on to the third goal. Where else could threats arise? Certainly we had secured the forward wall that it should never be breached by normal means. But what about the farther flung threats that are all too common to name? Normally, I would have armed my colonists, but instead I leaned harder into that niche that made us such an economic powerhouse. You see, we were essentially the good version of communism.
I control everyone, and they all do what they're supposed to. As a result, we enjoy the rewards and benefits of common prosperity. So be it. Our society was a grand experiment, complemented by the dryads that rose up out of nature, desiring that they should help us in carrying out our righteous, peaceful crusade toward a safe, efficient utopia. Suddenly, when drop pods arrived, I realized that there were still many flaws and threats I had yet to address. I paused in extreme panic. How fast could we run? Not very fast, but fast enough. They set fire to our beds, but our bedrooms were fireproofed. The raiders were unable to inflict additional suffering upon us since we had already relinquished so much of the material comforts and pleasures of meat and guns in order to progress our society toward this apex of civilization. You can't take anything away from an ascetic, and you can't take meat away from a vegan. Though you may shoot off my fingers, I didn't even need them. Again, the ultimate Sigma male flex. We were too focused on our grind to need our fingers. The intrinsic value of our work was reward enough. Our enemies, though puzzled, bathed in our tears for their fallen comrades, and they began to appreciate the beauty of life. Again, they were all released, with a 100% success rate, as long as they survived. One more big raid and they would become neutral with our faction. The plan was working. And so I took the time and extra resources to build up an elaborate peace symbol that grew heelroot, smoke leaf, and psychoid. We spent the rest of our time constructing beautiful art. Even when mechanoids attacked, we had already finished fortifying every square foot of our own base in case of the off chance that evil robots might rain out of the sky to end our operation. These are just the sacrifices it takes to live in a peaceful society. And then we set forth the date for the Jubilee of Non-Violence, most esteemed of pacifist rituals. As it turns out, this is just a dance party. Oh yeah. Back to work. It was a boring Jubilee, and nothing is more exciting than working. After all forms of entertainment and enjoyment are a lie, propagated by the media. Instead, we focused on shamanist activities and appealed to traditional family values and creativity. Anyone who disagreed could step on a fat spike trap. I mean blunt trap. In time, they would learn. After all, we were right, or were we? What is a life of conviction, and what is the good life? Well, enough of that. After some time, a woman named Ingrid wanted to join us, a 79-year-old asexual forester. The perfect match. It wasn't long before we were releasing the last of the hostile faction members, and we had grown to neutrality with everyone. You see, having relinquished violence, aggression, and dominance, we had done something known by almost no human civilization since the Greeks and Romans. We had surpassed any expectations, while the normies in the Dark Age shot each other with crude weapons, buzzed by their intake of smoke leaf. We became the market makers and the suppliers of smoke leaf. Essentially, we were Singapore. Copy all of the overpowered capitalist strategies on a societal level so that our economy would flourish, but continue to live as ascetics in common prosperity. We were living the good life. Don't question all of the corpses in the entryway. They brought it upon themselves. For it was our foes who walked into the inanimate objects, bringing the harm upon themselves. At long last, the kinship of Irarar attacked. We had finally achieved perfect peace. Hostility turned to neutrality, and all it cost was the entire forest. Every tree just lay there dead in ruins. But that's the cost it takes, and not all are willing to pay that in order to achieve peace and security. What would you be willing to sacrifice for world peace? We began to ascend into another evolution of civilization, utopia within our grasp. We had finally allied with all of the major factions, and we were untouchable. We did so by just sending everyone all of our silver. After all, of what use is money when you have friends? It meant that anyone unwilling to negotiate an alliance would be done in by our tougher allies, or would faceplant directly into the walls of the 3 wide blunt traps that were now placed around every square inch of land. Of what use is the natural landscape when you finally have security? Life is existential torture. You need to be willing to experience the maximum physical pain if you want to keep peace. We entered the age of Aquarius. Just when victory was within grasp, they say pride is the road to self-ruin. And after the Tower of Babel, history has naturally been the downfall of mankind ever since. Even the greatest tree, uprooted, will never grow again. And like young arrogant gods, one by one, Washing Beard, Sitara, Asana, Babar, and Ichabod ate their last supper. Some call it original sin.
I call it an unfortunate mod that causes you to die for meeting without a table. Whatever the cause, the mighty now look upon their works, and despair at the hubris of man and all his lofty hopes and expectations. We build castles in the sky, and they float only by our ambitions. But hope remains.
Today I'm revisiting everyone's favorite colony management simulator, Rimworld, to try out the new Biotech DLC. This expansion adds inheritable xenotypes, vampires, fur people, pregnancy, children, and my personal favorite, robots. There's a lot of stuff you can do now, but today I'm going to be trying out the Mechanitor start, a solo colonist scenario that pits you, a reclusive machinist, against the elements in an effort to rebuild your race of robot people and assume the throne of a mech hive underneath your command. Your only starting companions are your two humble servant drones, and your sole starting possessions no more than a scrap heap of metal and a few packed survival meals. Thanks to the new xenotype editor, I got to design my colonist, giving him blue skin, pimpin' green highlights, and at the steep cost of making him miserably inept at plant cutting and animal whispering, I imbued his genes with the ability to work all day and all night, never to sleep at all. His one trait, iron-willed, making him practically a robot himself, albeit with blood coursing through his veins. Day 1. So we arrived in a boreal forest from outer space on the first day via drop pods, a heap of metal potential. Our landing zone was naturally defensible with only one narrow entrance to the north, and the dirt on the surface was fertile and rich for planting. I decided to set up right where we planted. I didn't want to waste any time, so I immediately started delegating whatever work I could to the two drones at my disposal. One of them was built for hauling supplies, and the other for building constructions on our soon-to-be base. So I relieved myself of the burdens of hauling and building, reserving human time for higher-order tasks, while the bots worked on the menial labor. I think the goal and strategy are immediately apparent. I was going to need to build more bots, which in turn would keep producing yet even more bots, ultimately freeing up our protagonist for the most high-minded, intellectually demanding tasks. But until then, we were just going to have to get our hands dirty and labor alongside them. So on the first day, I designated a planting zone in the most fertile soil, and got to chopping wood. I wanted to build our base into the cliffside, so I set out a stockpile zone nearby, drone recharging stations, a wind turbine, and wires to power it all, along with a mech gestator, the incubator in which we would begin fabricating new mechs. I spent most of the day watching our bots haul back and forth as our protagonist slowly struggled to hew logs from the trees. We worked sleeplessly, straight through the night, and by the morning of day 2, we completed the wind turbine and powered the gestator to start building mechs. The first was the Agrahand, a planting bot. Its gestation period was around 3 days. On day 4, as the bot was incubating, we prepared the way by clearing all the fertile field squares for planting. Then I embarked on the gargantuan task of mining out the mountain, one square at a time. But our protagonist was feeble and slow and scratching away at the rock. Better work for a bot, but we still needed more stone and steel. Still stuck in menial labor. So as a solution to this dilemma, if we researched, we might be able to build more advanced, specialized bots for mining, though that required a signal chip, which could only be acquired by calling and dispatching a fearsome Diabolus threat. One great mechanoid accompanied by 3 guards. So that was our new goal, prepare a small mechanized military of our own in order to unlock the research for the next drones. So on day 5, I started gathering more resources to compound our strength. I sent the hauler and the constructor to bring back more stone and metal from the region and into our compound. There we were beginning to create a small military of robots. The process was slow, but it snowballed, and by day 13 we had 4 millibots following our protagonist as guards to a precious commodity. We summoned the Diabolus threat from the skies. Hours later, it drop-podded in with guards of its own, spitting fire on all sides from its Hellsphere can. Sure, there was friendly fire. I mean, there was a lot of friendly fire. But bots could be rejuvenated to full working condition in short order. And at the end of the combat, the Diabolus dropped a treasure, a signal chip, a mechanoid artifact containing the untold secrets of constructing more advanced bots capable of manifold tasks. Tunnelers to mine, scythers to fight, snipers to pick people off, along with a plethora of other menial tasks of labor, freeing up more of our time and resources. Thus we carried out our plans, repairing downed bots, all the while raising the number of bots in my bandwidth, just as our protagonist's passion led the research toward day 34, when we broke through to new mech tech. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty disorganized, so I just decided to put everything everywhere, until I had actually dug out a base under the mountain. The large bot gestation tube. We used brain scans to generate a more advanced, standard subcore, the beating heart of the embryonic sac that would come to be our tunneler mech. An absolute workhorse of a bot that can carve through sheer granite like sand. In the meantime, we constructed band nodes, which are basically like cell phone towers. These raised our bandwidth and let us control even more bots. Then a psychic ship crashed nearby. An easy mission for our bots and the machinist. Though there were some casualties, the truth is that even if the bots broke down, I could always just repair them. Feeble, fleshy human raiders too were no match. Although the repairs did drain my bots of energy, generating more pollution and entropy nearby at our toxic waste dumping site. This began to spread, and for all our defenses, after 10 days the tunneler's gestation came to its exciting conclusion with the birth of one of the most capable, efficient miner bots, which coincidentally looks a lot like Mr. Krabs. I mean, just look at that. And now our protagonist could research in peace. All the while, the tunneler plowed straight through the mountain to lay out a grand design for our mechanical compound, a palace of circuitry and metal. Then we sprang forth a scyther, a terror, sharp hand-to-hand combatant, a pikeman, a dead-eye sniper from far, and a scorcher, hell incarnate, to patrol the compound and beat off raids before they had any chance of getting near us, scorching the snow and saturating it with the blood of our foes. So we hibernated through the winter, as the tortoise seeks the shelter of its burrow during the solstice, building our labyrinth of machines and compounding our growth with new bots that built even more new bots, that themselves built even more new bots. So we weathered the winter, freezing the toxic waste packs and rendering them innocuous to halt the spread of pollution. And when spring thawed out the cold, our compound molted its former shoddy defenses and emerged with a sharp, gaping maw ready to devour raiders. This is around the time we called the next series of Diabolus threats, to get more signal chips and keep raising bandwidth. But now we had a bona fide defense. My robots are better than yours, especially when we have an unfair advantage. But in a fluke, the Diabolus drew the first blood from our protagonist, a discomforting reminder that at the center of our metallic fortress was a heart beating with sanguine red blood. Automation, production, strategy. The delicate organ that was keeping my colony humming was, in the end, a feeble but irreplaceable brain. And it was made of cells that could die. So I took the machinist off the front lines and unleashed my whole toolset, specialized to neutralize any threat on any side. An infestation in the halls? The Scorcher was as if tailor-made to stand behind the Scyther, showering the mega spiders in a cleansing baptism of fire. Our protagonist led from behind, escaping with only minor burns. More bots? No matter. Our tunneler had extracted so much plasteel and uranium from the Underdark that we could sustain dual autocannons and uranium slugger turrets indefinitely. We chased the mechs beneath the mountain in an ancient danger, who fell straight into our trap. Even the feeble humans trapped in the pods there weren't worth taking back into our indentured custody. They simply couldn't parse through tasks anywhere near the speed of a fleet of robots, all fine-tuned and geared for glorious efficiency. So by the time we were ready to summon a queen, we had automated practically every facet of our livelihood and defense. All that remained was to watch the conflagration and fireworks. When you hit a certain point, the power rule starts to kick in, and it's more like watching your colony than actually running it. The queen was surprisingly much easier than the repeated Diabolus raids. It turned out that we were over-prepared, and she dropped the penultimate mechanoid artifact, a power-focused chip, which we brought back into our RGB lab to study and fabricate fabricors, literally robots who fabricate things. After that, we waited an ungodly 6 and 12 gestation cycles to complete centipede gunners, centipede burners, and our very own Diabolus. Nonetheless, it was exciting that everything was now passive, to think it all began with just a single man. To be sure, it all still depended on him. I crafted yet still more implants to increase bandwidth and control. At times, after all, the mechs were starting to wander off, since they required so much sheer voltage to operate, and we struggled to wring out every last bit of possible energy we could harness from that plot of land. It all culminated in the ultimate defense, and led to one final encounter toward Ultra Mech Tech, the Apocryton raid. Yes, the Apocryton raid.
It sounds scary, but it's just a guy who teleports around and shoots toxic. Not that bad since we had fully committed to only one human. But he explodes at the end. So that was very cash money of him. My own Diabolus did, well, probably more damage to my defenses than the enemies did. But in the end, I gotta say that it's pretty metal to have a swarm of immortal, self-resurrecting robots at your beck and call. After that, as a victory lap, we could make our own legionnaires and queens, which honestly took literally forever. I don't really know where this ends, but
For a new challenge, I'm going to play Rimworld as a torso alone, starting with nothing, not even the clothes on my back. I've tried this challenge in Kenshi, but never in Rimworld before, so I'll be learning as we go, and I'm writing this script before I've begun. As always, our character will be Torsolo, a portmanteau of torso and solo. Get it? We'll be starting on the naked brutality scenario, which will cause us to enter the game crash landing from outer space in an escape pod, nude and without appendages. Unfortunately in Rimworld, if you entirely remove both arms and legs, it's impossible to play the game. So in order to make this challenge still be possible, I'm starting our character with a single peg leg made of wood and a wooden hand so that he can get himself started. What dangers lie in store? Can we acquire and craft the necessary materials in order to restore the body to full locomotion? On to the playthrough. On the first day, I spawned in by the traditional means, crash landing from outer space in an escape pod. Despite the handicap of no limbs, I had enough points to put into some necessary skills. I possessed many passions, but I was severely handicapped due to the fact that I had only 4 stumps and a couple shoddy prosthetics. 30% in both moving and manipulation. It might seem like a lot, but what it really makes you is a walking target, unable to construct anything, botching at every turn, and failing in all forms of melee combat. Therefore, all planning takes extra time. It's dangerous enough to be starting alone, but alone in this form? And so I undertook a more cerebral approach. When the body stops moving, the mind starts thinking. The ultimate goal would be to capture, recruit, or coerce any other colonist with the prerequisite medical skill into performing a set of basic surgeries on Torsolo. In Rimworld, there are multiple tiers of prosthetic augmentations, ranging from crude wooden fabrications to complex cybernetic enhancements, even more useful and powerful than their biological counterparts. But before that day, I'd need to fend for myself in the vast expanse of wild that surrounded me. I slowly dragged my body a few meters south to pick some berries. Naked and cautious, I spied a hollow, rocky outcropping into which I could lean for some shelter from the elements around me. Otherwise innocuous threats such as boom rats presented a unique challenge. I needed to proactively see the world in advance. Anything that might have previously seemed inane might be a cause of death if I didn't negotiate it correctly with my newly mangled body. Even simplistic tasks such as picking berries might yield only 50% or even less of their usual harvest. Healroot would help me. Anything I could hoard and store up. I attempted to minimize my work by fashioning a stockpile zone in an inlet of a cave wall. With the fabrication of a simple entryway, nothing could deteriorate on natural undergrowth. And if I hewed the logs from trees in a narrowed pinch in the gap, they'd yield enough resources to blueprint makeshift fortifications on the paltry inlet of land that was most easily defensible. Lead them into the gap, and there set a trap. Evening approached, and the sun set on the first day. With the wall having been attempted but woefully many segments botched by my poor coordination, I went to bed on the ground. Not bad for the meager 30% manipulation granted by a man hopping around on a single peg leg, smacking together chunks of wood with a single wooden hand. Dawn rose on the second day, and with it a burning passion to toil and strain at the dire need for survival. There's some quality about the calculent effort by a solitary individual in the face of overwhelming odds that makes the struggle of the underdog so downright interesting. Despite dropping mood from all those calm inconveniences not being met around me, a burning passion for the labor itself sustained me for the first few days. I inched up by increments in commanding the environment, despite weak and unwieldy lack of usable appendages. I chanced a rare fortune when a trader left a decent quality recurve bow on the ground as a sign of goodwill, and yet I considered it more of an ironic twist. Why leave a bow for a man with only one wooden hand? When a rabid rabbit attacked, the only thing that saved me was good planning, and the toil I had spent on fashioning a set of traps, not some sleight of hand. Unable to rely on my body, I'd need to fabricate the very structure of an environment around me into a robust defense. This is how it feels to play Rimworld, and that's when I realized that Torsolo was not actually that much worse than most of the colonists that the game throws at you at the beginning of your adventure. I reflected guiltily on all of the colonists I've left out in the dust for things like being pacifists, or vegans, or other people who refuse to consume
anything perhaps resembling human flesh in a pinch to get by. They were better left to the fire or stuck in a spike trap. That is, until eventually one of them set me on fire. I hopped on my peg leg to extinguish the flames with my wooden hand. I don't recommend doing this, but when life gives you lemons, you know how it goes. As I usually do in Rimworld, I waded through a sea of bad people with unusual names that the storyteller kept sending at me. There was a man who wanted to kill me. His name was just the word good. There was also a woman named Thomas? I'm not one to judge. I've never judged anyone before, ever. But unfortunately, none of these colonists possessed the prerequisite medical skills to perform the operation. Not really that it was all that difficult. I just needed to find someone capable of affixing a log of wood to my other leg, or lack thereof, stump. Then along came Maverick, the only colonist I met with the liberal arts degree required to be able to reattach a leg to man. Yes, a sweaty pessimist.
Every surgery in Rimworld is a risky endeavor, potentially either the saving grace that makes a colonist useful once again, or the doomed failure that drives them mad with rage if the surgery's botched. But this time, it was a success. Under anesthetic, the leg was securely fastened, and my ability to move around rose from 30 to 60%. Maybe that doesn't sound like much, but 2 peg legs are better than 1. With the leg on, I breathed an early sigh of relief. The first phase of the operation was completed, and now I had 1, recruited a suitable doctor, and 2, doubled my movement speed. It was bloody and filled with chance, and it had taken all of 1 in-game month to wait for those stars to align. The next phase would be more cerebral. Now, about a month in, I began work on production tables and benches. I would need to complete the research required to begin crafting more advanced prosthetics. As it turned out, Maverick was a sweaty, nudist pessimist. I attended to her needs and carried on. After all, she was the only other colonist required in this playthrough as a doctor. Think of it like farming for people. Except that sounds more dystopian than it actually was. There's no better feeling than watching everything work out, and all of your base turning from manual clicks into automated, self-completing tasks. After all, Rimworld is a colony manager for people who enjoy automation games more than colony managers. But there was still one major source of great dissatisfaction. Every single thing that I tried to construct kept getting botched due to the fact that I was constructing complex machinery with only a wooden stump. I was wasting both time and materials, as threats were growing and unpredictable outside the walls. So I undertook the one type of task I couldn't possibly fail at: learning, thinking, and researching. It was all a grand endeavor to speedrun my way toward artificial limbs, and that meant climbing the ladder of progress with prerequisite technologies, smithing, machining, and setting up workshops related to their employ. When you're possessed by a demon that drives you to accomplish your task, you work twice as fast. And so the research progressed, day and night, while the compound itself began to reflect the developments taking place on technological fronts. There were those 2 fronts of that war for survival, one physical and the other mental, whether they played out on the dirt or in the lab. As with any great endeavor, it's difficult to accomplish anything without banging your head against some brick walls. But fortunately, the acquisition of gray matter is a fluid process that gets easier and easier to grind out. And before long, the machining research, along with the research on prosthetics, was complete. A sector of the renovated storage was sanctioned off specifically for crafting, and there was more to celebrate. With a few much-needed fabrications from traders, we finally undertook the surgery to install the prosthetic, labored over by a single wooden stump. The first surgery was awful and unsuccessful, requiring a follow-up to set the limb on right. But we kept learning, and what was uncovered from the anesthetic was an entirely reinvented colonist. Maybe not a cybernetic warfighter yet, but certainly an improvement from before. Every development was a turn in that widening gyre toward the singularity. So the base grew and we continued in a dirge-like rock up the cyberpunk tree toward our biological deaths, reborn as cyborgs. Torso grew toward legendary status, a planet-known master, outfitting the laboratory with an upgrade, and flirting with the technological frontier toward bionic replacements. Blindsided, we were raided by tribals, the savage antithesis to our Archotech destiny, who marauded with grim intent. The wounds were bloody, but ephemeral. Just a reminder of the roots from which we had risen up. What I'm trying to say is, it was really cool. Blood and metal have a grim aesthetic, and it wasn't long before the operations were back in action. Early investments in technology led to an explosion of compounding returns. Growth accelerated. My ability to use my hands and work with tools started at only 30% with a wooden stump,
rose to 55 within a prosthetic arm, then continued their acceleration with the bionic arm up to 105%, and fleshed out in a godlike superhuman push to 125% manipulation with 2 bionic arms, accelerating the creation of limbs and pushing beyond human boundaries. Metal and sparks replaced flesh and blood, and the result was a marvel to behold. I armed myself, but can you imagine the humiliation and extreme lopsidedness of a superhuman cyborg hobbling and heaving around on 2 peg legs? With the wooden hand removed and a few more days of progress, I flashed like lightning back to the workshop, the anesthetic having just worn off, and spit out 2 bionic legs, quickly constructed by my superhuman torso and arms, 10 times faster than I had made the arms in the first place. The result, after having been limited to about half the speed of a normal human, was 2 surgeries for the price of 1. And just in time for a raid from pirates with high-powered armaments, actual revolvers this time. I was basically Nomad, the protagonist of Crisis, an overpowered geek capable of shooting his gun, then waiting till the enemy shoots, and escaping by turning invisible and outrunning the bullets the enemy just shot at him. Marvelously cheap were my victories. I was essentially a walking drone strike. You can curse technology as much as you want, but that won't save you when I vanquish you, and cheekily remove your bowler hat, strolling off into the sunset on my robot legs. And that was when I realized this was only the beginning. Why stop at replacement when you could become superhuman? So I made a few calls, and took advantage of all the content Ludion has jammed into the game over the last few years, applying the tech prints for a circadian half-cycler, a mysterious implant that circulates which half of the brain is in use at all times, resulting in perpetual consciousness, at the minor expense of 15% of your consciousness. That is to say, you no longer have to sleep. I added both this and 2 bionic eyes, fabricated in a day flat, resulting in a perpetually awake zombie cyborg man who is growingly out of touch with his physical human needs, proceeding ever higher toward the techno-astral plane. The problem with progress is that when you get too far, you don't even know what to do with it anymore. There's an upper limit to how interesting cooking rice can be, and when you're up all night and alone, you live on the edge, and occupy yourself with things like nocturnal hunting. We are truly alone in the universe, but what was there left to conquer? I could continue inventing ways to overcome biological needs, adding nuclear power to my digestive system, and forgoing the need for nutrition, but it was here that I decided a Darwinistic hunt would lead to the ultimate fulfillment. Yes, after that I would be completely satisfied, for sure. I fabricated the necessary supplies, and executed every last animal in the region as a training exercise. It was a bloodbath. Now I was beyond Torso. Torsplosion, the ultimate warrior. My final encounter with the Megasloth was the true display of both brains and brawn. I could overcome anyone, man, animal, the ultimate wombo combo, physical and mental 5-head Chad of that lonely Rimworld. So to answer my original question, yes, you can relimb and cyborgify even one with the least limbs in 100 days. Now the last test was to Wait a minute, what are you doing, Torsolo? No, don't eat without a table, that's dangerous.